All right. So, what we've got here is a little lesson on the three false doctrines that all Christians seem to believe. Number one, they seem to believe in eternal punishment. Number two, they seem to believe in human free will. And number three, they seem to believe in the immortal soul. So, let's go over these quickly. The idea of eternal punishment is real popular among Christians. They think that, there will be eternal punishment for your bad behavior on earth. The word eternal came to us through John Wycliffe. It was not an English word until he showed up and made the very first English Bible. When he made the very first English Bible, all he had access to was the Latin Vulgate, the Catholic Bible. The Catholics became a big popular political movement in the 3rd century, and they made up their own published Bible, and it went around the world. When this English fellow, John Wycliffe, got a hold of it, he made a pretty good translation, but what he did not know is that the word eternal, the Latin word aeternam and the Latin word secularum were synonyms in the 3rd century Latin language. They were synonyms. So when John Wycliffe got to the word aeternam, punishment, he made up a new English word, eternal punishment. And he didn't know that aeternam and secularum were synonyms. When he got to this phrase, the end of the secularum, well, his translation said, the end of the world. Secular, world, get it? Okay, so there's no such thing as eternal punishment, or there's no such thing as eternal rewards, because the Bible is actually talking about the aeons of time. It's aeonian punishment and aeonian rewards for behavior and choices that we make on earth. It's aeonian punishment and aeonian rewards. So it's all limited to the aeons of time. And the scripture says in several places that the aeons, the ages, will come to an end. Now, the second thing is human free will. The word free will by itself, it's hard to find anybody who will define it, but just by itself, it would mean that the will is uninfluenced. It's not influenced, it's a free will. The guy chose A, but he could have chosen B just as easily. But it's just not true, because our will is influenced. We have an influenced will. We have an encumbered will, not a free will. Our will is encumbered by our mentality, our education, our hair color, our parents. Our will is not free of the influence of the pizza that we ate last night or all that beer that we drank. Our will is just not free. The only creature, the only being in the universe that has a truly free will is God. His will is not influenced by anything because he created everything. His is truly a free will. Now the third item here, that you have an immortal soul. If you look up the word soul in the Old Testament, it shows up 400, maybe 500 times. And you don't even have to look at all 400 or 500 cases where the word soul shows up. Just look up 100 cases, 100 verses, and you'll see that there's no such concept in the Bible as immortal soul. The soul is mortal. In fact, one verse says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. So, eternal punishment, human free will, and immortal soul combine to make a mess of our understanding of God's purpose, his plan, and what's going on the cross of Christ. You see, Christians believe basically in themselves. They think they have an immortal soul, and they think that they have an almighty free will, and they can make these choices, and that their choice will get them eternal rewards instead of eternal punishment. But no, I'm telling you, God has a plan, a purpose. Ephesians 3:11 mentions, casually, as if it was well understood, something about God's aeonian purpose. What is God's aeonian purpose? The word purpose by itself would suggest something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, if your purpose is to clean the toilet or fix the toilet, It begins, it's finally accomplished, and then you put away your tools. So it can't be an eternal purpose in Ephesians 3:11. It's got to be an Aeonian purpose. So what is God's Aeonian purpose? What is God's purpose? That's a great question. Go ask your pastor. Go ask any other Christian brother who seems to be a leader. What is the purpose of God? Oh my word, they will not be able to discuss the matter with you because it's just not very well thought out. Because everybody has these three false doctrines deeply buried in their head, that there's eternal punishment, human free will, and an immortal soul to deal with. Your soul is not immortal. Your soul is mortal. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. What is the promise of the scriptures? What is the great hope that we have? It's that God will raise us from the dead. God will raise us from the dead. When Christ was on the cross, he died. Christ didn't have an immortal soul. He died, and God raised him from the dead, unable to die again. So, the three false doctrines that all Christians believe, mostly it affects their pride. They are so proud of themselves that they, of their human free will, chose to become a Christian, say the sinner's prayer, and get themselves locked into eternal rewards, and God bless their immortal soul. I tell you, this pride thing is a terrible sin that Christians are all committing. But if we understood that punishments and reward are temporary, they're limited to the ages, they're Aeonian punishments and Aeonian rewards, that just causes us to have a whole new appreciation for what's going on in this great plan of God. And that our human will is not free of influence? No, our will is very much bound. Even Martin Luther wrote a book called The Bondage of the Will. So our will is entangled, it's encumbered, it's not a free will at all. We are totally dependent on God to give us any insight into his plan and his purpose. We are dependent on God to give us faith. You can't even believe God unless God gives you the faith. It's not a free will decision that you make after hearing and being convinced by Billy Graham or John MacArthur or Joel Osteen or Joyce Myers. You can't believe unless God gives it to you to believe. And God will lock you up in stubbornness. One verse that you should pay attention to is Romans 11:32. It says God locks up all together in stubbornness. It doesn't mean that Christians have an idea of what's going on. They're all locked up in stubbornness, the same as regular unbelievers and sinners and pagans. And this is God's purpose and God's plan. God doesn't want everyone to see the truth at the moment. God gives faith to some, and he gives the gift of non-faith to the rest. Faith is a gift. And if you don't have faith, it means God hasn't given it to you, and that doesn't serve God's purpose yet. But one day, every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess, and it will bring glory to the Father. And it will all happen due to a foundation of what happened on the cross. Christ died for all. God raised him from the dead as proof that we were justified. And these three concepts of eternal punishment, human free will, and an immortal soul, they need to be flushed down your memory hole because they're not true. Our soul is mortal. But Paul tells us that one day this mortal shall put on immortality. And our hope is the resurrection. It's not that we can get our act together in a free will kind of way and avoid eternal punishment. Our hope is the resurrection. We look at what happened on the cross and we say, oh my God, this is something. This is powerful. This is the biggest thing to have ever come along. Someone rose from the dead. God raised Christ from the dead, unable to die again. In fact, here's something you can stick in your pipe and smoke. When Jesus rose from the dead and revealed himself to some of his disciples, they were shook up and thought they might be seeing a ghost. And Jesus said to them, "Come and touch me and see that I am flesh and bone." He didn't say, "See that I am flesh and blood." Flesh and blood is a common phrase, but he said, "Come and see that I am flesh and bone." He shed his blood on the cross to reconcile all. You'll find that in Colossians 1:20. He shed his blood. So when he rose from the dead, he was alive without blood. How's that for a puzzling thought? How does this all work? Well, you won't understand how it all works until you start down the road of getting rid of these three false doctrines that are typically believed by most Christians. There's no such thing as eternal punishment. There's no such thing as free will, and no such thing as an immortal soul. We're waiting for the resurrection. That's our hope. Okay, now, concerning this idea of free will, to show you that it's not free, if a fellow chooses A as opposed to B, why did he choose A? He chose it because there was some influence going on in his head. If I say, "Hey, you want a free trip to Disneyland or Disney World?" and you've got relatives in Florida, and so you would choose Disney World. So even your choice of Disney World was not a free choice. And of course, when you say to somebody, "Become a Christian or you'll burn in hell," that's definitely not a free choice. That's coercion. Become a Christian or you'll go to hell. All right, I got to wind it up here. Leave a comment or two and like and share.